Welcome back to Raw American History, the place where we talk about the stories that somehow didn't make it into your school textbooks, but absolutely should have. And today's story? Honestly, it's one of the greatest scams ever pulled on American soil. We're talking about the walking purchase of 1737, a land deal so shady, so rigged, and so devastating that it changed Pennsylvania forever. And the craziest part? Almost nobody knows about it. So buckle up, because this one includes political corruption, colonial greed, athletes for hire, forged deeds, betrayal, and a walk that turned into a full-on endurance race through the woods. Let's get into it. Now, before things went off the rails, Pennsylvania was different from the other colonies. While Virginia was fighting constantly with native nations, and New England was full of paranoia and brutal conflict, Pennsylvania stood out, and that was because of one man, William Penn. William Penn believed something radical for the 1600s, that nation tribes should be treated fairly, that agreements should be peaceful, that land shouldn't be stolen, bullied, or taken by force. Now, for decades, his approach actually worked. Pennsylvania was shockingly calm. It grew fast, and it grew peacefully. But then William Penn suffered a series of strokes, grew weaker, and eventually passed away. And when he did, power shifted to his sons. And that's when everything changed. Thomas and John Penn were nothing like their father. They saw the colony not as a moral experiment or a peaceful place, but as a business opportunity. Land meant money. More land meant more settlers, more taxes, and more power. And they wanted a lot of land. But the Lenape still lived across huge areas of eastern Pennsylvania. They had farmland, villages, hunting grounds, and territory protected by decades of agreements with William Penn. Negotiating honestly would have taken years. Negotiating fairly meant limits. But the Penn brothers weren't interested in fairness. So they dug into their father's old papers, and there they found something strange. An unsigned vague land deed from the 1680s that said the Lenape had agreed to sell as much land as a man could walk in a day and a half. Now, for the Lenape, this meant something simple. A reasonable, normal-paced walk through the woods. The traditional way land boundaries had always been measured. Nobody expected tricks. Nobody expected shortcuts. Nobody expected athletes sprinting for their lives. But that's exactly what the Penn brothers had in mind. Thomas Penn decided to use the deed as a loophole, a way to take far more land than the Lenape ever intended to sell. But to pull that off, he had to cheat. So he began planning like a man running a con. First, he took maps to find the longest possible direction the walk could go. Then he hired surveyors, friendly, paid-off surveyors, to map out the absolute maximum distance someone could cover in a day and a half. Next came the crazy part. He ordered settlers to secretly clear a path through the forest, a straight, wide, artificially prepared trail. This wasn't a forest walk. This was a colonial drag strip. But even that wasn't enough. Thomas Penn didn't want walkers. He wanted runners. So he recruited the fastest men he could find, the colonial equivalent of marathon athletes, and told them, go as far as you physically can. Push yourself until you collapse. The farther you go, the more land we get. He offered cash prizes. He offered land. He turned the walk into a competitive endurance race. And through all of this, the Lenape weren't told a single thing. They were kept completely in the dark. On September 19th of 1737, Lenape leaders arrived expecting a traditional land walk, calm, respectful, and measured. What they got instead was chaos. Penn surveyors lined up with stopwatches. The runners stretched like they were about to compete in the Olympics. And before the Lenape could even process what was happening, the signal was given. The runners exploded forward, sprinting with everything they had. This wasn't a walk. This was a land grab disguised as exercise. The Lenape instantly protested. They shouted that this wasn't what they agreed to. They demanded that the runners slow down to a normal pace, but the Penn surveyors ignored them. The runners didn't stop, and the Lenape realized in that moment they were being scammed. Over the next day and a half, the runners pushed themselves through clear paths, across rivers, over hills. One runner collapsed and died later from exhaustion, and another barely survived. At the end of the walk, the Penn family claimed over 1.2 million acres. That's the size of Rhode Island, all taken in a day and a half, all because somebody ran. The Lenape refused to accept the result. They said the deed was vague. They said the walk was rigged. They said the whole thing was a fraud, which, let's be honest, it absolutely was. But the Penn brothers had the entire colonial government on their side. Courts, controlled by Penn supporters. Surveyors, paid off. The government, a Penn loyalist. The Lenape appealed to the Iroquois Confederacy, hoping for support. But the Penns bribed and negotiated with the Iroquois leadership. The Iroquois pressured the Lenape to give up the land, and so the Lenape were forced out. Not gently, not respectfully. They were pushed at gunpoint out of the Delaware River Valley, their homeland for centuries. Families scattered, villages were abandoned. Generations of history were erased in weeks, and resentment grew. The walking purchase didn't just steal land, it shattered trust. The Lenape, who had been Pennsylvania's strongest allies, now viewed the colony as liars and thieves. They moved west, settled among other displaced tribes, and eventually aligned with the French during the French and Indian War. Raids increased, settlements burned, the frontier turned violent, and historians today trace much of that tension directly back to this scam. The Penn family's greed destabilized an entire region. Even colonial leaders called it out at the time. Benjamin Franklin, who usually tried to avoid criticizing the Penns too harshly, called the walking purchase a shocking fraud. William Penn's legacy of peace destroyed by his own sons. So why isn't this taught in school? Well, because it exposes an uncomfortable truth. Colonial America wasn't just brave pilgrims and noble founders. It was also corruption, manipulation, and injustice. And the walking purchase is one of the clearest examples. It's messy, it's ugly, it doesn't fit the heroic narrative, so it gets left out. But that's why we talk about it here. The walking purchase wasn't just a scam, it was a turning point, a moment when peaceful coexistence collapsed, a moment when one colony chose profit over honor, a moment when trust was broken and never repaired. And it reshaped Pennsylvania, the Lenape people, and the entire northeastern frontier. Hey, thanks for watching Raw American History, where we dig up stories they didn't want you to know. If you learned something new today, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around, because next episode, we're diving into another piece of forgotten history that deserves to be told.